Hundreds of tractors block streets in central London. The latest protest by farmers against the government after it ended an exemption from inheritance tax for agricultural families.
Nigel Farage has offered legal support to farmers after several arrests were made at a tractor protest in Whitehall yesterday. These demonstrations targeted.
Let's hear now from someone who attended the protest here in Westminster.
Based in Essex, we're arable farmers. We own about 400 acres, which is my grandfather and my father bought over.
Something is shifting in rural Britain, and the signs have been building for months. Not in dramatic explosions or headline-grabbing violence, but in frustration, exhaustion, and a sense of unfairness that has now reached a breaking point. Across the countryside, farmers feel that the policies shaping their livelihoods are being written by people who have never set foot in a milking shed or walked a field at 4 a.m. Tension has been growing quietly, steadily, until it finally spilled into view through one of the largest coordinated agricultural demonstrations Britain has seen in years. Convoys of tractors began appearing on major roads leading into the capital. Farmers who normally avoid political confrontation now found themselves planning long journeys to Westminster, not as activists, but as people who believe their warnings are no longer being heard. Produce prices are tightening, operating costs are soaring, regulatory burdens keep rising, and tax reform proposals have triggered an alarm across the agricultural sector. The feeling in many rural communities is simple and painful. They are being asked to absorb more than they can bear. The protest planned outside Parliament is not a spontaneous outburst. It is the culmination of months of meetings, letters, petitions, and quiet attempts at dialogue. But after long silence from policymakers and rising pressure on everyday operations, farmers concluded they needed to be seen and heard at a scale that London could not ignore. The roads leading toward Westminster reflected that determination. Hundreds of tractors, farm vehicles and supporters created rolling blockades not out of hostility, but out of desperation. This is not a standoff with tanks or a government under siege. It is a moment of national reckoning between two populations that depend on each other, yet increasingly do not understand each other. Farmers feel that the political class sees their land only as numbers on a spreadsheet, assets to tax, plots to regulate, acreage to calculate rather than lifetimes of work, generational heritage, and the backbone of Britain's food security. Much of the anger was triggered by proposed reforms to agricultural property relief and inheritance taxation. Under these proposals, land assessed at several £1 million, despite generating modest yearly income, could face substantial tax burdens when passed from parent to child. Policymakers see this as closing a loophole. Farmers see it as placing a financial execution order on the family farm. This is where the misunderstanding between urban and rural Britain sharpens. A farm valued at £3 million does not mean the owner is wealthy in the conventional sense. The land is the business, it is the home, it is the tool, the asset, the workplace and the retirement plan. It feeds the family but rarely makes them rich. Many farms earn annual profits barely above the national median salary, yet under the proposed tax structure, heirs could face six-figure bills with no liquid capital to pay them. To urban policymakers, this might appear manageable: sell a field, consolidate, restructure. To farmers, it means dismantling the very foundation that allows the business to function. A farmer cannot sell 10 acres without losing efficiency. They cannot sell their best soil without damaging productivity. And if they are forced to sell large portions of land, the business ceases to be viable altogether. This is the heart of the rural frustration. They feel punished for assets that are only valuable on paper. They feel unseen by a political class that misinterprets land value as disposable wealth, and they feel increasingly convinced that the people designing agricultural policy do not understand agriculture at all. As the demonstration grows, British families begin to pay attention. They hear farmers explain that supermarkets operate on razor-thin margins, that imports already dominate certain sectors, and that domestic production cannot simply bounce back once infrastructure collapses. They learn that losing farms to forced sales or bankruptcies does not lead to new British farmers stepping in, but to foreign investment companies buying up land, converting it to non-food uses, or holding it as long-term assets. food security becomes part of the national conversation. Again, the public is reminded that Britain produces only about half of the food it consumes. Any further decline in domestic production is not a minor inconvenience, it is a strategic vulnerability. Inside Parliament, officials are not unaware of the tension. They have seen advisory memos from DEFRA warning that sudden tax changes could accelerate insolvency among smaller farms. They have reviewed reports describing mental health pressures in the sector, challenges in the dairy and livestock industries, and the fragility of rural supply chains. But in the machinery of government, these warnings often get buried beneath broader fiscal goals and political messaging. The focus remains on balancing budgets, closing perceived loopholes, and signalling fairness in tax policy. Farmers, however, see something different. They see policies that treat them as a revenue stream rather than a national resource. They see a government more willing to subsidise imported foods than to support domestic producers. They see environmental targets shaped without consulting the people most responsible for managing the land. They see rural Britain slipping from priority into afterthought. The protest outside Parliament becomes a symbolic moment, not because it threatens the government's authority, but because it forces ministers to confront an uncomfortable truth. The country's agricultural backbone feels abandoned. The images from Westminster, tractors lined in neat rows, farmers holding placards, calling for fairness, rural families speaking openly about their struggles, begins circulating across the country. There is no violence, no dramatic clashes, just a palpable sense of urgency and exhaustion. One farmer summarises it perfectly on camera. We don't want handouts, we don't want special treatment, we want to survive. And if the people who feed this nation cannot survive, then this nation has a much deeper problem than it realises. His words resonate because they are true. Farmers are not protesting for privilege. They are protesting for continuity, for the ability to pass on land that has been cultivated for generations, for recognition that food security depends not on ideology, but on practical support for the people who produce food. As the day unfolds, political leaders begin issuing statements. Some express concern for rural livelihoods. Others defend the tax reform proposals, insisting they promote fairness, but the core issue is not addressed. Farmers remain unconvinced that the government understands the consequences. What happened outside Parliament is more than a protest. It is a reminder that the people who feed the country are not an interest group. They are an essential pillar of national stability. Whether the government listens now will determine not only the future of British farming, but the nation's ability to remain resilient in an uncertain world.